Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, April 15, 2025. Time in Texas, about 1 p.m. Some of the sources I'll use today. A recent interview of Martin Armstrong by Alex Jones, as shown on Steve Quayle's Aggregate site. Hal Turner, New York prepper, Fox News. Ryan Hall, y'all, Texas Weather Center and space weather. Some of the things we'll cover. A comet hits the sun and produces a G3 and a KP7 coming in. California shakes and President Trump wants peace and Europe wants war. So let's get started. We're going to begin with what's going on in Texas weather. So we're going to Wednesday, Thursday, Friday have some thunderstorms in central, northeastern Texas that will extend into Oklahoma and then further east into the U.S. And on Friday, we'll have scattered thunderstorms central to northeastern Texas, beginning in about the Fort Stockton area. Saturday, beginning in the Austin area, about central Texas, we're going to have some heavier thunderstorms, rain, hail. And this morning, the people in North Texas woke up to a surprise thunderstorm with nickel-sized hail. So that's going on. So we may have some Easter egg-sized hail beginning in Austin, extending northeast in Texas on Easter. So we have this now. We had yesterday, according to BPEARTHWATCH, a comet hit the sun. It released 2 filaments and produced 2 Cme'S. And BP is putting this forth that this expected space weather impact on Earth in the next couple of days could also impact our health. And he puts forth some good information based on his own experience regarding a what he calls cervical angina, which means there's a blockage in your neck that affects your heart. So I'll try to link that for you. And we have this. In the central U.S. to northeast, we'll have more of these thunderstorms Wednesday through the weekend. The 2 filaments, 2 Cme'S from the sun are going to produce a geomagnetic G3 storm with a KP index of 7. And this is to arrive later today and could produce auroras in Canada down to the top tier of the northern U.S. states, and also impact us later today into tomorrow, April 16. So that's going on. Have this from a Facebook. People only see the decisions you make, and they don't see the choices you had. So yeah. That's good to put forth to people who want to come against us sometimes. You didn't see the choices I had, but you do see the good decisions I made. Now, we're experiencing, California is shaking. We had yesterday in San Diego a 5.2, initially put out a 6.0. Now, I will say this. When I was in college in the 90s, and I was studying the earth and earthquakes and so on, it came out, and of course I had no reference base to assess what that actually meant. But the USGS or some other organization somewhere along the lines. I don't know if it was World War II, after World War II, end of the 50s or 60s. But what they did with the Richter scale is they reduced the magnitude. In other words, if they say, we say now we had a 5, in the past it would have registered as a 6. Now, I do not know why the Richter scale was modified, but I do recall my profs talking about that. So at any rate, we had what's now a 5.2 in San Diego. Happened yesterday about 10 a.m. and the depth was about 14 kilometers or 9 miles. Immediately after 10 a.m., the 5.2, possibly up to a 6, readjusted by the USGS. We had within minutes, I think we had 4s and some 3s, and I understand the swarm has continued. And this happened 2 miles from Julian, California, which is the nearest large city is San Diego. So that happened yesterday. What has geologists concerned is that we had that 5.2 yesterday near California, closest to Julian, California. We've had swarm of earthquakes continuing in that area, but it has also triggered swarms of small earthquakes in other fault areas, including San Andres, and extending up into Washington State. So that's going on. So we can accurately say California is shaking. So that's going on. And now let's talk about what the U.S. is doing militarily. We believe positioning the U.S. military to defend the U.S. against the CCP and the cartels. So last week I reported we had 2 U.S. military destroyers, one in the Gulf of America, the Gravely. We also had last week a second destroyer positioned in this area adjacent to Mexico, the Speroness. In the past several days, we've had a third destroyer positioned. It went through the Panama Canal, and just in the last week or so, President Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, had put in place a passage of U.S. military ships through the Panama Canal on a first basis. In other words, if a U.S. military ship shows up at the canal, it is to go through first. And Panama is to charge the U.S. $0 for that U.S. military ship passing through. Before President Trump, Panama Canal charged U.S. military ships $1 million to pass through. That's gone away. And now we have, so the Stockdale, the USS Stockdale, the third destroyer, is passing through the Panama Canal and will also be positioned in the Gulf of America. Never in the history of the U.S. have we had U.S. destroyers, warships, in the Gulf of America. And we know in the past it was called the Gulf of Mexico. We haven't had that in the past. We also know that President Trump has taken advantage of what's called the Roosevelt Act and has placed the U.S. military, so we have the U.S. military now along the border of California, Arizona, and New Mexico. We now have 3 U.S. destroyers positioned around Mexico, and just with the 2, it was put forth by military analysts that those 2 destroyers could strike anywhere in Mexico. Now we have a 3rd. But it's also believed, and based on my last video, the CCP, it's believed, is definitely embedded in Mexico. So that's going on. Now we have this from Real Raw News. President Trump has learned that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of employees in the U.S. State Department who regularly practice satanic rituals in the State Department. President Trump has put forth a directive to locate these individuals and, of course, fire them. So that's going on. Now, I will put this forth, and this will be controversial, but so be it. About 5 years ago, God gave me something that I found very shocking, and it took me 2 to 3 years to be able to fully grasp that. But what God put forth to me was that the U.S. Constitution did guarantee freedom of worship, but it was freedom of worship for Him, not for other religions. So that's going on. So Satanist, you don't have freedom of religion according to God and the U.S. Constitution. So we have this now. Martin Armstrong, globally famous economist who works with his predictive software Socrates, recently interviewed by Alex Jones on InfoWars and carried by Steve Quayle's Aggregate site, talking about what's going on in Europe and Ukraine and Russia. So we have President Trump coming in, we believe, as an ambassador for God to bring certain things to the U.S. So President Trump, for the U.S., he is to bring peace and to stabilize our economy. What we're seeing now, and make no doubt about it, we have neocons also hidden in the U.S. government and Congress. Remember, we saw in 2020 a coup by the U.S. Congress. So it's good to remember there are still many in Congress who are neocons, who are deep state operatives and want to destroy America. But we see the neocons actively exposed in Europe. And it's good to remember that many of these European nations joined the EU, the European Union, solely based on the moves by their governments without the vote of the citizens of that nation. So we see the citizens of Europe held in a situation by government leaders who were not put in place by the people. And we see overt communist moves now in Romania and in Turkey and in other locations. Romania, the people voted in Calin Georgescu. The deep state-controlled government says we're not going to accept that vote. We'll have a second one in May. Before Georgescu could register for the second vote, the commie Romanian government arrested him. We see in Turkey, Erdogan arresting his opponents, including the mayor of Istanbul and the mayor of other large Turkey cities. So we see communism on full display in Europe. Now, Romania and Turkey are both NATO allies. I, as an American citizen, believe that America should withdraw from all globalist organizations, NATO, the UN, and so on. So we see, and what Martin Armstrong is putting forth is that the Cme'S in control of Europe want to take European people to a CBDC, digital currency, so they can control even more than they are controlling now. We see the UK overtly displaying it is now a communist nation by arresting its citizens who speak out against its government. What they're doing in the UK is, it's insane. They are arresting their citizens who complain when the illegals there rape and murder. Oh, you can't talk out against the illegals we brought in here to destroy the culture and economy so we can take complete communist control of the UK. You UK citizens, you have no rights. We'll lock you up. And UK citizens are actually being put in jail when they put anything out on their social media that's against the UK government. They're locked up. It's even gone further. The UK government is now monitoring the UK citizens' normal phone calls they have with friends and families. If you say anything against the government, allegedly in your private phone conversations, we'll lock you up. Make no mistake about it. The UK is now also full stop communist. So that's going on. So Martin Armstrong puts forth the neocons, the communists in control of Europe, want to take Europe to war, and they have a 20-year war plan, and these psychopaths in charge of Europe actually believe that Europe can overcome Russia militarily. And we have in Ukraine 1.1 million Ukrainian citizens have passed away since 2022, with the communist dictator Zelensky now actively kidnapping Ukrainian citizens and putting them on the front line. The world is aware of this. Zelensky, as I put forth in my previous video, has stolen billions of dollars from the American people. He buys a controlling interest in platinum companies. He buys wineries in Italy. He owns a $34 million mansion in Miami, Florida. When are the American people going to unite and rise up and say, stop this insanity? And further, why is the U.S. continuing money and weapons to Ukraine? It has been well established over the period of the past 2 to 3 years that the U.S. military weapons going to Ukraine wind up on the black market. That's to put more money in the evil and corrupt pockets of Zelensky. President Trump does well to pursue peace in both the Ukraine and the Middle East. I see people are criticizing President Trump's Representative Witkoff for putting forth the statements that would foundate an agreement between the U.S. and Iran to avoid a direct conflict. And I bring up again Sun Tzu, Art of War. Several tenets. One is to overcome your enemy any way possible without using your military. Second, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. I believe President Trump is doing well and is pursuing peace, which is a godly path to take. So that's going on. And now we have this. So Martin Armstrong says, yes, tariffs do work if they've done in the right way. And that Europe, he believes, and he also has access to his predictive software Socrates, that the European Union will cease to exist by 2029, and that we see communism on full display in Europe based on elections by citizens being dismissed by the communist government leaders of various European nations. And those at the top of the European Union who are directing the direction of Europe are unelected and do not represent the citizens of the European nations. The neocons in Europe want to destroy Europe and take Europe to the CBDC so they can control all the money. And Poland is moving forward to draft its citizens. According to Martin Armstrong, that would be a reasonable move based on what Poland is doing now to draft its citizens. The economies of Europe are being taken down and impacted negatively by the tariffs. Our President Trump, a brilliant economist, strategist, is putting forth against both Europe and China to impact negatively their economies to bring them to the table of peace. And we say, keep it up, President Trump. And we have this. Also, the communists in Europe want to negatively impact the economy of the U.S. and destroy the U.S. economy. So that's going on. In China, we have the neocons, the communists inside the U.S. government, who also want to take the U.S. to war. One of the chips they're using is to say that Taiwan is independent of China. And that's to goad China into a war with the U.S. And that is to be avoided. And we have this. So Sal M, what's up with shipping, is putting forth there is some misinformation going around on social media platforms that ships are leaving China, and based on the tariffs, they're turning around and going back to China. Sal M says, no, this is not true. And we have this. Currently, China's tariff against the U.S. is 84%. U.S. tariff against China, 145. And it exempts, the U.S. tariffs exempt certain things from China, including computers and phones. So that's going on. And Sal M says also exports. Yeah, exports have gone up 12% in March, and that was based on the impact of the tariffs. Everyone wants to beat the tariffs. We have this from Hal Turner. So in the Ukraine war, there have been many other citizens from other nations killed in the Ukraine war. It's being put forth they are mercenaries, but I've put forth many reports, reliable sources, that NATO had active duty military fighting inside Ukraine. So now we have a list of citizens that Russia has identified, and they identified them based on their ID documents that they found on their bodies. So this is the number of citizens of other nations Russia has killed in the Ukraine combat zone. Poland, 1,963. The nation of Georgia, 1,230. Colombia, 917. France, 208. Germany, 197. The UK, 156. The US, 89. Austria, 17. Japan, 4. So that's going on. If you think that our U.S. military is not being drugged into this war in Ukraine, I think it would be good to think again. Now, we have this Merz, this new leader in Germany, whom Medvedev, a previous president of Russia, calls a Nazi, and says that Metz's father worked for Hitler in the Germany war machine in World War II. So he calls Metz a Nazi. And Metz has said, we're going to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Now, the Taurus missiles, the German Taurus missiles, have a special ability. I believe they don't need to be targeted with GPS targeting. I think the Taurus missiles can be manually targeted and don't require satellite backup. I believe that's their advantage, the Taurus missiles. Metz of Germany said, yes, we're going to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine. However, the Ukrainians cannot operate the Taurus missiles. It would require training by German advisors, trainers, for 12 to 18 months. Now, anyone who is rational, looking at what's going on in Ukraine, would reasonably determine that Germany wouldn't have 12 to 18 months to train the Ukrainians to operate the Taurus missiles. Therefore, it's more likely Merz of Germany will simply send the Taurus missiles to Ukraine and send German military in to operate those missiles pretty soon. And when they do, they become legitimate combat targets for Russia. So that's going on. But another example of Germany, a nation who it's believed also, if they didn't directly collude, they said nothing when the U.S. took out the N1, N2 pipeline from Russia to give cheap energy to Germany. That was destroyed. And you heard nothing from the German government decrying that fact. And I put forth, in the past 1.5 years or 2 years, the objective of the communists in charge of Germany and Europe was to destroy, number one, the economy of Germany, and also destroy the economies of the European Union and destroy the economy of America through war. So that happened. And we see a German communist government colluding with the deep state to destroy Germany. And I have this from a Patriot subscriber. I love President Trump and his intellect and his natural instincts to bring us forward as a stronger sovereign country. And I believe there are evil workers against President Trump and his campaign. So it would be good for us to pray for President Trump, the U.S. military, and America. I agree 100%. God is in charge. Now, this is from a Patriot subscriber. We all know Congress was involved in the JB coup. Yes, and I have a Patriot subscriber talking about the leader of Canada, Carney, and talking about the CCP being in Canada, yes, and talking about, I am surprised President Trump, is supporting Carney. And I have this to say from Sun Tzu, Art of War: keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. And now we have this from Facebook. It's a good closing for this video. So this week in the past, when Jesus was on earth, he kissed Judas and washed his feet. Think about that as you struggle to forgive others. Yeah. And I will say this from my own life experience. Yes. So, it is not good to hold within you hate and unforgiveness for others. And I have learned in the past, when I experienced this, I knew it wasn't right. And yet I was just overcome with hate. So every morning I would wake up and say, I give this to you, Jesus, God the Father. It's not something I can handle. And I give it to you, and I know it's not right. And I'm not supposed to hold on to hate and unforgiveness. And then after about 2 weeks, I woke up one morning, and all that hate and unforgiveness was gone. And in addition, I also had compassion for that person. Isn't God good? So I say to my family and friends, remain steady out there. Continue to pray. God is in charge, and he is on the move. I love you, and I'll see you soon.